often an area that doesn't get enough attention. And unfortunately, that's often where deals die.
The Daimler-Benz Chrysler merger of 1998 failed miserably because of Nokia and Microsoft. Also, 2014 failed miserably. There's a lot of examples out there. So what you need to do is make sure that you're really aware. At one point, they found a company they were planning to acquire, and one of the leaders said, "I don't care, it'll work out fine." They acquired the company. It was an abysmal failure. If this integration fails, it won't be because we didn't do the technology right, because we can solve that. But if it fails, it'll be because we didn't do the change management for the cultural piece. Okay, well, I say the number one thing, aside running parallel to culture, is you have to have it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is M&A. My next guest is the CEO and founder of AviatrXX, a woman-owned business that specializes in change management and post-merger integrations. For over 3 decades, she's worked with large and mega cap companies such as Nike, CBRE, Visa, Chevron. She's also the author of a book called Invisible Forces at Work: What Causes Workplace Conflict and How to Thrive and Grow During It. In her spare time, she's passionate about cooking and dreams of owning her own olive farm. So to all my sellers out there, if you have an olive grove, I may have a buyer for you. With that being said, let's go ahead and invite Diane Weinsheimer.
Hi, Steve, and thank you so much for having me. And also, thank you for the plug about the olive grove.
Yes, I
I'm
found,
looking forward to hearing from people who own one,
yes.
because my ultimate goal is to make olive oil.
And that I know when we were chatting about it, that seemed very interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you do.
Right, so I'm very excited about talking about M&As too, because both of those are a passion of mine.
Perfect. Well, we're going to jump right in. So first and foremost, happy to have you. You and I have chatted on many occasions. I found what you're working on in the post-merger integration world very interesting, and I'm sure audience will as well. We're going to be covering what happens after the ink dries, right? It's often an area that doesn't get enough attention, and unfortunately, that's often where deals die, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to unpack that a little bit. We're going to talk through several topics. One, which is why post-close is where most deals fall apart, what a winning playbook looks like, right? And how to communicate change without losing trust, because that's the key. How to spot culture risk early, right? In an ideal world, during diligence. And in addition to that, we're going to cover the team integration and how that can get messy, because it often does. So with that being said, I guess, Diane, where do we get started? Where would you like to jump in at?
Well, let's talk about why most deals fall apart post-close. So when executives are evaluating potential mergers or acquisitions, they meticulously analyze financial statements, potential operational synergies, and things that are going to make the business grow. Often overlooked is the cultural alignment. There are many notable examples of big mergers or acquisitions that failed due to cultural misalignment. So one that almost everybody's heard of who's in the M&A world is the Daimler-Benz Chrysler merger of 1998 failed miserably because of cultural clashes. Nokia and Microsoft, also 2014, failed miserably because of culture clashes. There's a lot of examples out there. So what you need to do is make sure that you're really aware of what the culture is of the company that you're targeting to buy.
Yeah, I remember one example. I believe it was Sprint and Nextel, same thing, right? Just
Same thing happened to them.
Yeah, two completely different cultures. I mean, culture plays such a significant role in the success of what happens. And that's why I think we're going to focus quite a bit of attention on that specifically, because I think that's the piece that's overlooked, right? That's often like you described. We're so focused as founders, as CEOs, as deal makers, we're focused on the front end of things, right? We're talking through, what do the financials look like? What's the EBITDA? What's the revenue? What's the projections? What is the C-level C-suite look like, and what does it look like afterwards? But what oftentimes gets ignored, at least through my lens and what I've seen in some of these integrations, is exactly that you described. It's the culture element of it. So Have you personally oh, sorry, go ahead. You're going to say something?
I just want to make a note. A recent client, I was leading an IT integration for a client, global organization also. And the CIO said to me, if this integration fails, it won't be because we didn't do the technology right, because we can solve that. But if it fails, it'll be because we didn't do the change management for the cultural piece well. So that was a lot of pressure on us, but that's something we already knew.
Right, right, makes sense. And we're kind of skipping ahead, but we also didn't have necessarily an order in which we would talk about these key topics. So I'm happy that we're jumping right into the culture side of it. Just a question on that front: what have you seen in your years and decades of experience? What have you seen as far as like one of the most critical tipping points to when cultures don't align? Is it normally between teams? Is it normally, and what teams are those? Is it start at the C-suite, and integrating that, or like, what does that normally look like?
Well, it's not really the teams so much as the overall culture.
Okay.
So the organizational culture, which of course cascades down into the teams, that's where you see it on the ground. But it's like some companies, some of the examples we talked about, one company had a very traditional hierarchical culture. Another company had this entrepreneurial sort of culture going on. So where you see it is how decisions are made, the management style, how training is handled, even HR policies, work styles, communication styles. All of those are where you see the cultural mismatch that can cause a deal to fail. And like I said, it cascades down to the frontline folks. You can see in team integrations where one entity's team, let's say in a specific function, wants to make decisions via consensus, and the other one wants it to be sort of a top-down thing. Well, the manager said, we're going to do this.
Right.
So then there's that clash right there. And then it leaves the company who has been acquired feeling really lost. Like,
Right.
okay, well, how do I fit into this organization? Because the first question that employees have when they're being acquired or merged is, will I have a job?
Right.
Is there going to be room for me? Am I going to be replaced? Of course, the second question is, am I still going to get paid in the same way, on the same time schedule, through the same process? I had a client who had acquired some employees in India, and I had calls late Sunday nights for me with them because it was early Monday morning for them. And their big worry was, everybody wants to know, we're still going to get paid on the same schedule, because we were changing their HR systems.
Right.
So, the culture, it impacts everything, Steve. It impacts everything.
Yeah.
And if it's not fit, I have a friend who also works for a large global organization, insurance organization. And she said they always do their culture assessments in due diligence, which is what we recommend and do, because if it's not a fit, it should be a no-go decision.
Right.
And their company, at one point, they found a company they were planning to acquire. The cultural assessment said this is not a good fit. And one of the leaders said, I don't care, it'll work out fine. They acquired the company. It was an abysmal failure. So you've got to really pay attention to this stuff.
You bring up an interesting point. You were talking about other countries, and so obviously that's a whole nother element, right? Is some of these larger transactions that you've worked on. I imagine they have offices across the globe, right? So a lot of cross-border related stuff.
Yeah.
And so how does that play into the culture integration, right? How does that, what have you seen in those types of environments that's kind of either a common mistake that's made or what companies do really well?
So this really links back to your other topic about a communication playbook, which is also all about culture. And the first thing that comes up for me is I had another global organization who had acquired some people in Japan, and they were trying to get them on their product lifecycle management application. Well, the people in Japan were being very resistant, and we're thinking, why? They know, how to do this. They're smart. They're engineers, all this. And talking to people over there, I had a local contact in Thailand who actually had good relationships with the people in Japan. She said, the problem is you're sending everything over here in English. All the training materials, all the communications are in English. And they all speak English, but that's not their first language. And they really wanted to see stuff in Japanese so they could really understand the intricacies of this new program, this new application. So that was where the culture thing came in. What I've learned going forward is the most important thing you can do is understand the culture of the people that are being acquired or integrated. And that means, do they need to see everything in their own language? I've had acquired employees in other countries who said, hey, English is fine with us.
Right.
But then there's others that say, we need it in our own language. You need to send the communication in our time zone, in our vehicles, our venues, all of that. And so the culture plays into that kind of thing too. The communication is key because you have to build trust with these people because they don't know if they're going to have a job.
Right.
They don't know if their systems are going to be the same. They don't know if they're going to be relocated, if their office is going to be shut down, all of that.
When I noticed in my career, early on when I had to manage a global team, right? I had a team in France, I had a team in Japan, I had a team in the US, a team in Australia. It's how it was communicated as well plays such an important role, right? I remember this
Yes.
was green, Steve, right? Where I was just getting used to running a global team. I remember jumping to a meeting and I'm making American comments, right? In outs and I'm thinking it's funny. My France team didn't think it was funny, right?
Right.
They were a straight face, and I'm like a deer in headlights. I'm like, oh my gosh, did I offend somebody? It wasn't that. It's just how you communicate matters.
Mhm.
It's that important, right?
And it's also who communicates it to them. So when we have global, employees globally being acquired or merged, I usually have a global team.
Right.
And so I have communications and change management experts in various regions or countries who can tap into local contacts in every country or site that's being integrated. And those people are just key for us to be successful in building trust in communications because they tell us, okay, you can't say it like that. We review everything with them. We know the messages that we want to get out, but we'll send it to the local contact. We'll say, you can't say it like that, or we have to include this message or that message. It needs to come out at this time in this vehicle, etc. So, and like to your point, Steve, we're all from different countries. When you say something, you don't mean to be offensive, but you don't know what is offensive to them until you get there and really understand,
Right.
how they communicate. And that's why you need a local contact.
And so I think that's extremely important as you described the local component of it. So there's a local component where you have someone like your team, for example, that has staff in different parts of the world that can be present. But just to piggyback on that, how important is it to have a local presence with the C-level, the C-suite, or the direct management in these transitions? How critical is it to the success of having someone actually present in there? I know we have Zooms and everything else nowadays. I still think nothing supplements when you're going through such an important change of actually having someone in territory present and kind of delivering the communications, because I don't remember the numbers, but most of the communication and how it's received is based on the smile, right? The eye
Who delivers
contact
it?
and how it's being delivered, right? Versus the words behind it. So how does that play into it? Given that the world's kind of evolved to a point where most of us feel like Zoom's good enough, right? Yeah, maybe you could speak to that.
Well, your initial comment was how important is it to have a leadership or senior management deliver this? I think that's what you were driving towards.
Correct.
And so when we build our sort of change agent network, which there's several different levels, the frontline people would be like the local contact who helps us with communication. The top level is the leadership in that area, that region, that state, that country, and they are the ones that we ask to deliver. So we generally set up an ongoing meeting with the leadership in each area that's going to be integrated. And by area, again, I mean state, local, region, country, etc., or function even. And so we keep in touch with them. And what are they seeing? What are they hearing? That we tell them what's coming. We keep them apprised of everything. And then we give them messages to be delivered, but they run it again. We run it through the local contact, and they work together to get those messages delivered in appropriate way for that area, for that employee population. It's really critical because that's, I think, something that Americans have historically struggled with because we've been a very big global presence, and I think we used to always come into these other countries and just communicate the way we would do it in the U.S.
Right.
And we learned the hard way that doesn't work. Like they need to hear these words and this message and these changes in their own language and from someone that they trust.
Right. And we talked about more cross-border, but it doesn't always have to cross borders either, right? On how you communicate. I mean, it could be as simple as when you communicate or how you communicate to someone on the West Coast versus the East Coast
Yes.
versus the Midwest, right? I mean, that matters, right? Everybody has different holidays, different values and whatnot, based on the region in which they're from.
Global organization we worked with who has lots of offices in the US, we found out we couldn't do the IT integration for their site, one of the sites in, I forget what state it was, because it was their hunting week. So they shut down the whole entire office so everybody can go hunting. And that is a local culture. That was their
Right.
office's culture. I'm sure it was part of the city that they were in also, or maybe even the state, but we couldn't do it because we couldn't integrate them until after their hunting week. And
Right.
then also there's often different cultures within one organization. So we had a client from Korea who has a US subsidiary. The US subsidiary was struggling because there were two clashing cultures going on within the organization, in the US organization.
Mhm.
And that's because they had Korean leadership here who was operating from the Korean culture. And then they had US employees who were American born, and they had a different culture going on. So they were clashing just within that one organization. So with,
Right.
business is about people, even if there's, obviously it's numbers, it's profit margins, it's bottom lines, it's this, it's that, strategies, all this, but it's about people. People are what's running the business. You got to understand them as much as you possibly can to achieve the success they're looking for.
Agreed. Agreed. I mean, people are what make companies successful at the end of the day, right? If it's great people.
Yes.
And the beauty of people is we're all unique. And even from a management perspective, right? What you do with one person may not be applicable to the next person. Someone in
Correct.
sales and what you do with someone in marketing versus how you talk to someone in operations, it's very different. Same thing with engineering, right? It's a different mindset. They're wired
Or
differently.
accounting. Yeah,
Right,
it's really
right.
super different.
Yep.
So what I would like to share something about the cultural assessments we do during due diligence, because you did say something about how do you spot a cultural risk during the due diligence. So and this involves your organization too, Steve. So during due diligence, which is when we recommend the cultural assessment is done, don't wait till after they're there and say, "Oh, well, let's try to blend these two cultures." It doesn't work.
What a- what
That's
a-
what happened.
what about even before that? Let's just take a step back, right? You're in diligence. That's one point in time to assess diligence. But what about even before that, right? Making sure that you document what your culture is, the key points. Like, is there a checklist for that as well? So, like, before you even get into a process, right? Just if you're a buying or selling on both sides, do you advise like, hey, do a cultural assessment, right? You may have a culture defined, but do they need to take that even deeper, lay it out? Like, what are key things that are important to us that we want to make sure we map as we explore the buy side or the sell side, right?
Yes, exactly. And you really can't assess a cultural fit without knowing what your own culture is.
Right.
So that's something that we recommend too. And most companies, well, I shouldn't say most companies. It is, as I said, becoming more widely known now how important the cultural fit is. But larger companies know what their culture is. They're very aware of that. They've done cultural assessments. Again, this is where your company, ShareVault, comes into play, because to do our cultural assessment, we want those documents, which are usually very confidential, someplace secure where we can review them. And then once we start gathering data from the targeted company, those are very confidential documents. And so we look to ShareVault to put all those documents into your secure virtual data rooms where they can be reviewed during the assessment. And then, we can make the decision about, is this a cultural fit or not? And each company doesn't have to have the perfect exact fit. There's lots of synergies between cultures many times, but when it's completely opposite, that's where we say, hey, this is a no-go. We don't recommend that you do it. If you do it, you've got a lot of risk that you have to deal with. But then what we come out of with our plan when it's not totally misaligned is a plan for here's where you have crossover in your cultures that could be a benefit. Here's the plan we recommend to build up those elements. And then all of that plays into the communications, all of the change management, everything that happens. I mean, even so much as when we lead an IT integration,
Yeah.
one client had 1,000 applications between the acquiring company and the targeted company. So we had to go through and say, which ones should we keep? Which one should we get rid of? Should we bring new ones in? Well, how you introduce those changes to the acquired employees is a cultural thing that you have to take into account
Right.
when you're letting them know these changes are coming.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I know we're in the process of changing out some systems, and there's some heartburn. People are nervous, right? Inertia inertia kicks in. They're used to
Mhm.
seeing a report a particular way, going to a particular spot to pull that
Right.
report. So I can only imagine on a much bigger scale, right? We're taking these two large entities and changing out systems, how people can get nervous about that, right? Because
Yes.
even myself, I look at the tools I use. I'm as good as the tools I have, right? The visibility I have into the work people are doing. So that's a huge potential disruptor, and you probably got to take into account too a learning curve for a lot of those folks.
I'm just going to bring that up. Then there's training that gets involved. And then the other thing is, again, this feeds back into their anxiety about their jobs. If you take that application away that I was using to do my job, does that mean my job's going away?
Right.
If I have to use a new one, does that mean that my job's going away? So there's so much to consider
Yeah.
during integration. It takes a lot of skill. Okay. And so I have told you before, sometimes clients will say, oh, you're like a psychologist. Well, we're not psychologists. We have a very deep understanding of human behavior. That's how we got into change management. And so, and then also, I don't know uh, if you saw the recent report or an article that McKinsey did on the communication styles of women CEOs. I mean, they talked about their leadership styles in general, and they focused on their communication skills and talked about how women have sort of a natural ability to build credibility and trust in their communications. So they may hold a stakeholder meeting and talk about the change impacts that are coming up, the business impacts, but they'll also discuss the cultural implications that are happening. They might say, I don't really have the answer to everything, but we'll let you know when we get there. So women will also speak candidly about failure, ambiguity, and systemic change, will announce a change, but also leave space for dialogue and co-creation on things. So it makes us sort of especially qualified to do change management and to do post-merger integration work. Because as we said, culture is everything because it impacts every single part of you doing business.
Right. No, those things are so important, and I must err on the side of more of a woman-owned business type thinking, and maybe it's because I was raised by my mom who owned her own business, and I got to see all those things come together firsthand. But what you're speaking to really resonates with myself. I find that in change management, transparency and over communicating is
Yes.
extremely important, and being empathetic to people. And I practice that in everything I do in my business, right? I want to be
Mm-hmm.
empathetic. I put myself in their shoes. How would they feel on the receiving end? And it's never steered me wrong. It's always steered me in the right direction. So with all that being said, help us understand. I know we touched on it a little bit. Like, what is that winning playbook for someone listening today, whether it's a CEO, a founder, an entrepreneur who might be getting to a spot where they're going through some M&A transaction where it's like, this is the winning playbook for you. And it could be winning, but it can also be, I guess another way to frame it is what to watch out for, right? Like this is where things blow up. And I know you mentioned culture being one of those, right? But where have you seen, sorry, I'm kind of piggybacking and bouncing around on the question, but just to give a little more context, where have you seen a lot of these problems become persistent? And what are those problems that explode some of these post-merger integrations? Aside from just culture, what are some other key takeaways folks can have where it's like, okay, I got to remember that, right?
Okay. Well, I said the number one thing aside, running parallel to culture is you have to have an integration management office. I don't care if it's one person, but you've got to have an IMO, and you have to have a well thought out integration plan. So I've had, and be open to changing it. But I've worked with smaller companies who they did the deal. They had someone help them with that, but then there was no integration plan. So the deal maker who worked with them got the deal done, but then they were left trying to integrate the new employees, and they had no idea how to do it. So what happened was then they had to pull people off their regular jobs to have them full-time focus on, oh, how do we integrate these people? What about their computers? What about their applications? What about all the different things that come with a new employees coming into a new company? So that's one thing, like that integration plan is key. Larger companies I've worked with, they have different work streams for each function, like IT or HR or finance, and then each function develops their own playbook. So that's something I recommend too, because this is one thing you don't fly by the seat of your pants on.
Right, right. No, I can imagine. So have you had some examples that you can share where you walked into a culture clash, right? Where maybe it was an afterthought and that you got involved versus it was a thought before getting in diligence, right? The ideal scenario is you're as you're highlighting is think about culture as early as you can. But and if you get caught up in the diligence spot and you start to think about culture, so be it. But if you can, think about it before that. But let's just say you're in the diligence and you didn't think about culture. So all of a sudden you got these two companies combining, right? What type of culture clash have you been part of? And if we have someone who's in that mode right now and they find themselves kind of battling with this culture clash, how do they fix it? Right? What should they be thinking about doing? Are there any tips or tricks that you can share on that front?
I really hate to say this, but if it's that much of a clash, the deal probably isn't going to be very successful. But if you're determined that this deal is going to, you're staying the course with the integration and you're having a serious culture clash, this is the time to meet with leadership, which we're usually part of the senior leadership team during the integration, and meet with them and say, okay, what are you willing to give up as far as are you willing to accept this or make, let them have more, let's say, autonomy in making decisions, or let's make the decision by consensus rather than hierarchical. It's the leadership's decision. Like they have to really decide, what are you willing to give up? What are you willing to adapt to? You have to make the choices of what you can live with going forward in order to get the synergies that you were looking for when you made the deal.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, listen.
But don't try to force it. I'm telling you, if it's a really serious culture clash, don't be like Sprint and Nextel, and don't be like Daimler-Benz and Chrysler.
Right.
Like don't let it go on to you've lost all the money that you thought that you put into the deal and then some.
Right. Right. Have you seen any examples where there are compromises made kind of in that post merger integration process that maybe wasn't going so smooth, but they made compromises on both sides and were able to come to a resolve where it like allowed them to go forward and be successful?
Yes, and that was a large global organization also. They didn't think about the culture ahead of time, even though they had established a culture function, a department of culture within HR, and they knew what their culture was like. And then they did a survey after they acquired this company to determine, or an assessment to determine what the culture was of the acquired company. And then they did all these beautiful graphics about where they synced up and where they didn't.
Right.
But they never implemented that stuff. I shouldn't say never. During the initial 100 days of the integration, and not even 100 days, I take that back. I was there for years, so 365 days. Those changes weren't implemented, but a plan was made because it started to show up in team integrations, which you talked about earlier today, is some of the teams weren't working well together because of the culture clashes. And so then they were having to, okay, I guess we do need to make some changes here. So then it went back to the senior leadership team, the C-suite, who was kind of arm wrestling over what they're going to let go of and how they could, adapt. I mean, the acquiring company had to adapt.
Right.
It was the acquired company. Yes, they had to adapt to being acquired, but the C-suite, senior leadership team, they had to adapt to, okay, we have to change our culture a little bit. And is it worth it? Yeah, because it was a big deal. It was a multi-billion-dollar deal.
Diane, let's get to know you a little bit now, right? Early childhood memory that you can point to where you're like, made sense when I was young. I did this, and and it maps back to where I'm at today, right?
Okay, well, a couple of things. One, I always wanted to have my own business because I always wanted to be the boss. And I wanted to have my earning potential unlimited. My dad also took me to his office with him in downtown Los Angeles. He was a vice president for a moving and storage company. So I really got indoctrinated into business early. But then as I was growing up, I really had this nurturing sort of instinct towards people. And I used to write letters for friends to their boyfriends or the friends they had falling out with or whatever. And then I also always stood up for the underdog. So as I made my way through my career, I started in really marketing and communications.
Okay.
And then it was employee communications. And I consulted with Kaiser Permanente for 15 years. And it started out as being employee communications. And then employee communications and HR sort of shook hands back in the early 2000s. And it became, it's change management. It became a new discipline. And so I just sort of fell into that because I was already working for Kaiser. I was already doing all their employee communications. And then I did an IT reorganization. And we said, that's really change management.
Right.
And I realized that I really like to help people through change. So my sort of nurturing, standing up for the underdog, all that kind of thing led me into, let me help people through really difficult times in business. But I love the mergers and acquisitions because I love the deals too.
Right.
I love the business aspect of it.
Well, it's interesting how it came full circle. So you mentioned your dad in that story was he potentially a mentor for you or what?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Definitely. There were 6 children in my family, 5 girls, 1 boy. Nobody else cared about business except me. So my dad would take me to his office and let me type on his typewriter and do all these things. And we talked about business, and he always encouraged me and told me how smart I was and that, I could be anything I want to do and I could do this stuff in business, blah, blah. So and he encouraged me all the way along in my career. In fact, he'd be really happy if he's here today to watch this podcast and see the output of his training and his mentoring.
Right. Well, so then I'm going to ask you the golden question. Did you ever have a chance to tell him that you owe your success to him today?
Yes, actually, I was working for Chevron, and they sent me to Singapore because I was working on a big B2B project, global with their global customers, gas stations and such. And I was looking for a present for my dad, my whole family, and I found this little journal I thought, because he loved to travel and he loved to write.
Okay.
And so I thought, I'll get him this little cool multicolored journal. And I wrote in there, you're the one that got me started in all this business and taught me the joys of traveling. So I wrote this really wonderful thing to him to let him know what impact he had had on me in my career.
Oh, that's awesome. There's no better feeling than to being able to do that. Being a dad who has had a daughter come to him and tell me that I was their mentor and being able to convey that, it was emotional. It was a great feeling. And so there's nothing better than being able to have the opportunity to hear that. So I'm sure your dad on the other end was, grateful and enjoyed hearing that coming from you. Tell us, how can people get in touch with you?
So the best place is two. There's our website, which is AviatrXX.com, or reach out to me, Diane, at AviatrXX.com. Also, of course, I'm on LinkedIn. So I have a page for AviatrX and a personal profile.
Perfect. I'm sure listeners will enjoy this conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show. We had so much we didn't have a chance to unpack. This is a topic that I think we could do 3 or 4 podcasts on in reality. So I look forward to inviting you back on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Steve. It was really fun talking with you about this because, you get so busy talking to your clients and figuring out what they need, but being able to just talk about where I came from, what I'm doing now, the challenges for my clients, all of that is really I don't know. It's just really, I really appreciate and enjoyed being able to have this conversation with you.
If this episode sharpened your thinking, share it, post your take, follow the show, or drop a quick review and bring it into your next deal. We'll be back with more real talk from people who've been in the room when it counted. The views and opinions expressed on This Is M&A are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect the views of any company or organization mentioned. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, financial, or investment advice. Always consult a qualified professional before making business decisions.